When you deep dive into the world of your subconscious mind, you will meet the powerful creator that you are meant to be. Leave old and dysfunctional patterns behind. Have and become what you really want, and not just what you think you can. Develop a new relationship with the world and embrace your true destiny. Welcome to the Prosperity Mindset with Robertszentes. Hello everyone, welcome back. And I'm really excited because in this episode, I will talk about a topic that I believe affects every single one of us. And recently I posted a few things on LinkedIn and Facebook, and I talked about chronic pain in the body, in the physical body, being a signal or a byproduct of us having unconscious, unresolved anger and rage. And it stirred up a lot of great conversations, and I decided to make a podcast about it because it is so vital to know. And in this episode, I will show you guys or talk about how these negative emotions accumulate, how they show up in our physical reality, how they show up in the body, how they show up in your physical circumstances, and what are the techniques and the knowledge that you could take away so that you could start releasing them. So what are negative emotions? This has been a great question because for most of us, and this used to be me, by the way, up until 2010 when I got hit really hard by a stroke, and even prior to that I had very severe medical conditions. And now looking back, it was the greatest gift, but at the time I didn't realize that those were byproducts of my negative emotions. And in this episode I will dive into what happens and how this formulated, and in the next episode next week I'll give you guys even more details about how these emotional effects create these adverse life circumstances. But in this episode, I want to focus on the formulations and the messages of negative emotions, okay? Negative emotions are emotions in the body that are not, or the opposite of joy, the opposite of bliss. And I will mention a few, and of course, there are more. For example, anger is a negative emotion. Sadness is a negative emotion. Fear is a negative emotion. Hurt is a negative emotion. Guilt. Okay? So all of these are the five main categories of negative emotions, and there are of course dozens and dozens, if not hundreds more. And the purpose of my episode, of this podcast here, guys, is to teach you something that I learned the hard way, to teach you something life-changing. And it is so counterintuitive that if you knew this, say 10 or 20 years ago, you could have avoided so many problems and troubles. And of course, I'm not saying it to make you mad or to go back and to say should have, could have, would have, but rather to take advantage of this knowledge and start applying it today. If you were to take an organic matter, say lemon peels, or maybe even the veggie remains that you are not using in your soup, and you put it in the dirt, you make a compost pile. Over time, and it could be a few weeks, it could be a few months, but say for certain a year later, that organic matter would fully decompose. Would you agree? You would not be able to find it in its original form. It would be completely become one with the dirt. And that's awesome. That's great. And that's what we are doing unconsciously with our negative emotions. We're trying to shove them deep down in the dirt, try to forget about them. But the problem is that our negative emotions that stem from interactions or seemingly negative interactions and our perceptions are not like this or these organic matter. They will not decompose. They will not decompose, okay? They will grow and accumulate over time. And this is the first counterintuitive thing I'd like you to know, right? So in other words, say that when you were 2.5 or 3, you might have thrown temper tantrums, okay? Who didn't, right? It's part of our power calibration, it's part of our voice calibration, part of our energy and other unconscious things that we are exhibiting. And if we are shamed or we perceive things in moments like that, it gets buried and shoved down and hoping that it would decompose, but it never ever does. So what we do, we create masks, new identities, and new behaviors, but the original anger, the original frustration, the original disappointment never ever goes away because it never gets processed. So we move on. Several years later, we might be in our early teens and we begin to date. And then all of a sudden we experience rejection and it hurts. Okay, and then we get angry. And then we move on, we shove it down. Again, even that event never decomposes, it just accumulates. And then we are at the age of 16 or 17 and we begin to drive and, we carry all that baggage, if you will. And then somebody cuts us off and then we just want to freak out. There's this road rage energy, this rage, this anger in us. And if we were to stop for a moment, this rage, this road rage isn't really born in that moment when it happens. It is what I call a domino effect, an accumulation effect of all the previous stories, okay? All the previous events that we experienced but never resolved. Now, of course, what does it mean to resolve something? Well, there are very specific subconscious messages in all these events, and there are very, very specific subconscious techniques that we need to apply if we want to resolve them. But who teaches that, right? Up until just recently, this knowledge has been almost like inaccessible or unavailable, or I don't know where the heck it was for thousands of years. But, we actually do have the techniques to process these events. But if we don't process them properly, then we will feel the accumulation effect. And road rage is one way that you will see all of these angry outbursts and then the confrontations or byproducts of these accumulation effects. Okay? So, as you could see, the domino effect is really interesting because what we tend to do is not understand that it is 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 adds up to what we feel today, and we tend to focus only on the very, very event that's in front of us. But that's not really the reason why we have it, because there was an event before, there was an event before that, an event before that, and that is why the saying, like, don't shoot the messenger. If somebody, like a person, triggers you or makes you really angry, no one can really make you angry. It just activated this accumulated stuff in you, okay? So what we feel in our body today, again, is a total sum of what we had experienced or have experienced and perceived, but left unresolved and unprocessed. Now, here's a cool thing. Once we resolve these stories and once we resolve these negative emotions and process them properly, then the pain, illness, financial problems, relationship problems, all of these will literally vanish like nothing ever happened. It's so cool. It's just amazing, right? Now, what I want to do here is tell you guys where, say, our anger comes from. And all other negative emotions work the same, but I want to focus on anger because that's sort of easy to feel. Anger comes from unresolved childhood stories, comes from teenage stories, and however old you may be today or whatever your age might be, you had situations where things didn't exactly work out the way you wanted, and you felt the emotion of anger. And don't want you to shame any of that, because right now I'm trying to help you take a step away from it and see it from a higher perspective, from a logical perspective. And when you can do that, that's when you begin to release the accumulation of this anger and you begin to have a better life. So we these angers come from childhood, teenage stuff, even from our ancestors. And ancestry also can mean cultural stuff. I told you I grew up in Hungary, and there's quite a lot of anger and rage and sadness in the Hungarian culture. So I had to examine a lot of the historical events, also had to examine a lot of my childhood events, and everything adds up. And not just mathematically, but adds up meaning like it makes sense, right? When you look at, the historical events and where they lost the battle or they lost the war, and then when in my childhood I felt like I did all the right things and I was still ignored, all of these are, definitely stories that we carry and create a lot of anger. And when we don't process them, I mentioned this, but I really want to iterate this again, because this is the key thing I want you guys to know once and for all, is that all unprocessed negative emotions will add up to some kind of adverse life circumstance. We tend to focus on relationship health or happiness or physical health and also our financial health. And all of these things are byproducts of how we feel. And I mentioned this, I will get into the broader scope of this next week. But as you could see, a few childhood stories combined with a few ancestral stories can easily add up to health issues. A few childhood stories or teenage stories combined with a few cultural stories could easily end up in financial troubles. Most people struggle with their romantic relationships. All of that is because of these unresolved negative emotions. All right? So here is what I have been teaching for 10 years, and I'd like to share a really awesome, very functional, and very deliberate recipe with you. I will describe 4 steps, and then I will also mention a few caveats. So feel free to take notes. In fact, I would like you to take some notes, because this knowledge is not very common. And when you follow the recipe, when you follow this system and formula, you can begin to improve your life in profound ways. So the first step I suggest that you do is you examine past events where anger was present for you. Okay? So it doesn't take any type of extra effort to be able to ask your mind to take you back to events where you felt negative emotions, specifically anger. And focus on anger right now, because if you jump all over the place and start bringing in other emotions, then you're kind of like, muddling the water here, okay? So if you can hold the focus, you should all of a sudden have an event that you get all reminded of by your mind. And here's the interesting thing, guys. We all do this all day long, all year long, right? We always go back and in time, and then we remember things, but the trouble is we remember the event the same way we perceived it the first time. And most of the time, guys, the reason why we have negative emotions is because our perceptions were, to a large degree, potentially incorrect. So if you were to go back to this event that your mind brought you, where you felt anger, here's what you could do. See what positive lessons you can take away. Now, this can be challenging in the beginning, because you might have been hurt, you might have been yelled at, you might have been embarrassed. And then what is the positive lesson? I'll help you. Just stick around. Here's another question that can help you sort of get into this energy, or to find the answers, is how did this event help you grow and evolve? Here are a few additional helpful hints. So whenever we perceive an event from a negative perspective, like we were the victims of, or these people were ugly, or these people did that and said this to us, and so on and so forth, if we run with that perception, it will make us very, very unsuccessful and very, very sick in the long run. And that's what most of us do. And that's what I used to do. Why? Because nobody teaches what not to do and what to do, right? So imagine if you had an event where you felt anger. Maybe you were unfairly treated or yelled at, or whatever your story is. I am not promoting victimhood here, but I want you to realize that the positive lessons always come in the form of a higher understanding. A higher understanding is that if you were hurt, you need to know that only hurt people can hurt people. That's why it's so important that you heal yourself, so you become a healed person, because healed people can heal people, right? So if you look at this other, maybe an event, somebody that yelled at you, hurt you, whatever happened, whatever made you angry, that person was likely in a really bad mood. That person may not have been in his or her full potential. That person may have had a really bad day. That person may be completely unaware of his or her pains, why she or he is experiencing all of those things, okay? So part of the positive learning is to understand another perspective without being fake about it. And this fakeness, I see, guys, comes out in this positive thinking. Oh, everybody needs love. Everything's love and love, love, love. And great. I teach what love really is in my advanced courses. It's not what people think. Okay? So don't be fake about it. Just be very intelligent about it and ask your higher mind to tell you what is a good positive takeaway without being superficial. This will help you immensely, because the moment you get clarity about what happened, the moment you begin to feel less and less negative emotions. And the less negative emotions you feel, the better your life circumstances turn. It's really cool. Okay? So this point was, what are the positive lessons that you forgot to take away? The next point is, what negative perceptions have you locked in which is harming you? Okay, I'll say this again. What negative perceptions have you locked in? Locked in meaning like, have you decided to keep or hold on to, which is harming you today? Now, I'll get into this a little bit because the ego is often in the way. Now, if you've done some substantial amount of self-development work, then it's easy to work with ego because it's already transcended and it's not pointing the finger. It's not really invested in protecting an old ideal that's already expired and not very helpful, right? So put the ego in the back pocket and then ask yourself, what negative perceptions have you logged in that's harming you today, or have you decided on? I'll give you guys a few ideas here. These perceptions, in moments of discomfort, moments of, these crazy stories that we've all been through, could be that we may have perceived that we were not loved. Huge. This is one of the most devastating beliefs. It's called a limiting belief that people decide or people create in moments of less than ideal circumstances. Another huge one is that we decide as children that apparently our parents or somebody doesn't care. Right? All of these are false or negative perceptions. But if we make a beginning to a belief like that, our life will morph to these beliefs. And you could see that's why billions of people are struggling today, because they carry these silent, seemingly inconspicuous beliefs, and yet these inconspicuous and seemingly small beliefs are running their show, running their lives. All right? So what did you decide? What belief did you create in the moment that is actually holding you back and harming you? Now here's the next one. What gifts could these past events or the people in these past events give you, which you didn't recognize in that moment? So what are the gifts from these people and from the events that you didn't recognize in that moment, but going back in time, instead of revisiting it with a renewed negative energy, like, oh, I told you so, look at them, these jerks, Instead of that, just shift your energy and shift your focus. Invite your higher self, your higher intelligence, and say, what are the gifts that I really took away? And you'll soon find that you have probably become a much stronger person. You have become, interestingly enough, more compassionate. You have become a kinder person. Maybe even you could say that you might have learned a skill that gave you a good paycheck, gave you a skill that you are able to use and create a better life. So that's why there's no such thing as a good or bad event or memory. Everything happens because there's some kind of evolutionary lesson in it. And when we learn how to interpret these perceptions and how to shift them, that's when we can turn our lives around and make it really miraculous. All right? So following these few initial steps, we'll begin to release these accumulated negative emotions and our perceptions. And then as you do that work, it will also allow you to go deeper. Now, here's a thing I want you to know. This is crucial. The only time you can feel negative emotions is when you have at least one, but typically there's more, limiting beliefs. A limiting belief is a belief, a statement, a conviction that you say to yourself that is actually creating negative emotions in you, or saying that the world somehow is faulty. A statement or this conviction that something is wrong with you, something is wrong with people, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, anything that goes against the higher energy of creation and the joy and the bliss that we all strive to achieve and want to achieve is somehow a limiting belief. But it's very easy to not recognize them because there's hundreds of them at any given moment. And when you begin to peel the layers back, that's when you can start freeing yourself from the trap, because they literally create energetic traps. They put veils over your eyes. These limiting beliefs will not allow you to see the truth. Okay? And that's why I wrote my book, The Mastering of Your Mind, because these inconspicuous and very harmful limiting beliefs that every single one of us carry caused, for example, my life to fall apart. You know, my 6-figure job, I lost it. My health, I lost. I was bankrupt twice and divorced twice, even though I did all the right things. But my thinking was wrong. My belief system was wrong. I believed so many negative things about myself. You know, this is what we call the negative self-talk. I was so angry, even though I was funny and I was, you know, the clown of every party. Okay, so what we exhibit and how we behave is not necessarily how we feel. Quite often, those are sort of masks to, you know, cover things up or to assuage our pain. So in this book, The Mastering of Your Mind, I share 10 years of experience of what it takes and what specific limiting beliefs cause relationship problems, health issues, and money problems. And I'm sure that you have had people that want to shove all kinds of products and books down your throat. You know, I appreciate that. You know, the reason why I'm saying it, mentioning it, that the mastering of your mind is different. It's a recipe. It's a recipe that is breaking down a very complex system of beliefs, delivering it in a very simple manner. I wrote it so anybody could understand and follow. And when you apply that, you could literally overcome a big chunk of your pain, a big chunk of your anger, and then you can continue life with a renewed energy. All right. Now, here's one last and closing thought, that when you begin to work with anger, it's really awesome because you will see how many different events there were that were never properly addressed or resolved. But anger is very strangely intertwined with sadness. Okay, I don't want to get into the psychology of it. Why? I teach this in my expert coach program, how to release these negative emotions. But if you begin to work with anger and you find yourself having sadness, that's perfectly fine. You know, that's natural. And you can do the same technique, follow the same recipe I shared here. You explore your past events in the context of sadness, and then take away the positive learnings, see how that event or how these people helped you grow and evolve. And, you know, even if you skip this second step, which is the sadness, you'll feel it, and it will be just another reminder that something needs to be examined. Okay? So whenever there's any kind of negative emotion, all it means is that something in our unconscious world is ready for resolution. It's asking you to resolve it. It could come from your past or could come from your ancestral past. I mentioned this, that there's a lot of our cultural stuff. I grew up in Europe. You might have been born in the United States, wherever, but you could have Irish heritage. So a lot of those things then would show up in your physical reality. All right. So guys, listen to this a couple times, or take some good notes, because what I have shared in this podcast is 10 years of deliberate and very advanced research. It brought me back from literally a very severe and dire dark place, and I'm feeling and doing amazingly well today. I have helped thousands of people around the world achieve the same, and this can be you too. All right. So negative emotions are your messengers. Quite often events and circumstances and other people will trigger these negative emotions in you so that you become aware of something new, something advanced that you were not aware before, that you could look at, examine, and then grow above. So guys, this is the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will present next week a more expanded version of negative emotions, where I will tell you how everything is emotional. Everything's emotionally created, and what that means specifically. I will give you guys some really good down-to-earth practical examples, and you can apply these and really change your life around practically overnight. So if you liked this episode, go ahead and subscribe and share. And stay tuned, as I will bring the next episode to you guys next week, next Wednesday. Talk soon. Cheers.